Economics Festival. At the outset, I would read out the code of conduct that I will request the audience to abide by. The audience is requested to keep their microphones off throughout the session. They are encouraged to turn on their videos if possible. Everyone is expected to maintain decorum during the lecture. Once the speaker has finished, the session will be open to questions, and you have to send in your questions to the questions moderator. I will now pass on the mic to Drishti to introduce our speaker.
Good evening, everyone. I, Drishti, on behalf of Economic Society of our college, welcome you all to the flagship event of the Economic Society, the National Economics Festival 2023. Welcome to another lecture of the lecture series of the National Economic Festival. This fine evening, we are privileged to have none other than Mr. Iqbal Dhaliwal. Mr. Iqbal Dhaliwal is the Global Executive Director of JPAL. He works with Board of Directors to develop organizations' strategic vision. He is also co-scientific director with Aether the Flow of JPAL's South Asia Regional Office and co-chair with Abhijit Banerjee of Innovation and Government Initiative. He has served as a member of Working Group Mission Karm Yogi, constituted by the Government of India. He began his career in public service as member of IS. He has also received the Director's Gold Medal at India's National Academy. He received his graduate degree from Delhi University in Economics and did his master's in economics from Delhi School of Economics. He did his MPA in International Development from Princeton School of Public and International Affairs. Sir, we are extremely grateful to you for giving us some of your valuable time, and we look forward to this session. So without further ado, I would like to pass the mic to you.
Great. Thank you very much. You can hear me well? Okay, excellent. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I tried my very best to get into St. Stephen's College, which I could not. So this is a nice consolation prize after 2 decades to be invited to a talk, even if you don't admit me to your college. I was, I always also have very fond memories of being your neighbor at the Delhi School of Economics, where both my wife and I went for our masters. So it's a real pleasure to be with you, and I hope one day I can be there in person as well. Okay, so thank you for also the generous introduction. I am going to share my screen to take you through some slides, and let me see if this works. Typically, it should. All right, share screen. And I can do desktop. Share. And then hopefully do this. All right. Are you guys able to see my screen?
Yes, sir, it's visible.
And the slides and everything, you see it in the presentation mode and not in the reader mode?
Yes, sir, in the presentation mode.
Awesome, awesome, very good. Okay, great. So, so the topic of my discussion today is growth is not enough, and how to use economics to fight poverty. And mostly what I'm going to feature on is the development, is the progress in development economics over the years. When we went to grad school, most of our classes in development economics a huge amount of them were all about growth. What makes one country grow faster than another country? What should a country do to stimulate economic growth? And growth has been a hugely important part of getting people out of poverty. And so nobody disputes that. The macroeconomists don't dispute that. The microeconomists like us, we don't dispute that. But I guess the question is growth enough? And as you can imagine, I don't believe it is. And then I'll take you through a little bit of the, how we think about it. So this is my broad outline for today, for the next 45-ish sort of a minutes. Telling you a little bit, one of my colleagues, Esther Duflo, talks about the role of economists as plumbers. And what she means is that how do you, very much like a drain pipe, the drain pipe gets clogged. And the role of the plumber is to figure out where the drain pipe is clogged and then what's the best way to increase the flow of water in that pipe. And so you can imagine, think of the flow of water as how do you get more children to come to school? How do you get more parents to immunize their children? How do you remove the frictions in the labor market? And so figuring out where these frictions are happening, and then designing the best interventions to remove those frictions and testing them as to which one is the most impactful. So I'll talk a little bit about that. The main thrust of the economics in this lecture is about measuring impact and how in development economics we measure impact using different methodologies, but the focus today is going to be on randomized controlled trials because that's what we mostly do. I'll take you through a case study in India where we worked on immunization increase across a number of states. I then take you through a quick trip across many different states in India where we are doing different things along with various state governments and others. And then just conclude by telling you, giving you some resources if you're interested in being a development economist that you might find interesting. Okay, so what this lecture is not about, for those of you who may or may not be disappointed, it's not about macroeconomics. So we're not going to talk about inflation rates, interest rates, exchange rates, or growth rates, or none of the rates are going to figure in today. It's very much a microeconomics lecture. It's about supply, demand, prices, and costs. But it's not you wearing your usual lens of production and consumption or profit maximization or finance. Instead, it is about poverty. It's about human behavior and institutions, which is what we call development economics. And even within development economics, it's not going to be a philosophical discussion of what are the causes of poverty and inequality or wealth distribution. Those are extremely important issues, but not what we are going to focus on today, maybe another time. Instead, it is a lot about doing something about poverty, and most importantly, doing it right now. So I think it's important to understand why I title this lecture in a particular way. So as I mentioned, the importance of growth cannot be understated. Growth is a hugely important part of taking people out of poverty, and it has been a top policy goal for countries and policymakers around the world. For instance, China's GDP has grown by about 10% per year since 1978, and it has propelled China to be the second largest economy in the world by a huge margin, right? If you look at Chinese economy and at about, I think, 14 trillion versus the next largest economy, I think it's probably Japan at 5 trillion. The scale is just incredible. And this economic growth has lifted almost 1 billion people with a B out of poverty. So those are staggering numbers, right? And never in human history have so many people been taken out of poverty as simply by the Chinese economic growth. The benefits of increased, just to give you an example, for instance, why people will often say that economic growth is the best way to get people out of poverty. So healthcare is one of the biggest things that we as development economists care about. Now, as a country gets richer through economic growth, there are lots of benefits of this. For instance, healthcare. You can build new hospitals and new health centers. You can hire more health workers, and you can pay these health workers much more. You can train these health workers much better. And you can make the greater investment in the latest medical technology. So you can have ultrasounds in not just the district hospitals, but right in the primary health centers. You can do better cancer and non-communicable disease detection. So I think it's extremely obvious that economic growth can have a fundamentally massive impact on any driver of poverty. But the more important question that we also have to ask today is that, is rapid economic growth enough to drive development and help struggling communities escape poverty? So despite economic growth, problems persist. As we are very much aware, in China, for instance, 300+ million people still remain below the upper middle income poverty line, which is about $6 a day. In 2017, for instance, if you look globally, 1.5 million, that's 16 lakh people died from diarrhea, 1/3 of whom were children under 5. So just think about those numbers, right? Really staggering numbers. All of us are reading about the earthquake in Turkey. There is, news reporters from NDTV and India Today telling you how they're reporting from the biggest crisis ever. So we are all transfixed by the Turkish earthquake, the Turkish Syrian earthquake, and rightfully so. It's a human tragedy of really big scale, and so much suffering is going to come from it. But even the Haiti earthquake, which happened a few years ago and is considered one of the deadliest earthquakes, killed about 250,000 people, so 2.5 lakh people. And think about how much attention these earthquakes get, and then you think about it. Every year, 16 lakh people are dying. That's like many, many, many times more than an earthquake. But how many times is it in the news that 16 lakh children are dying every year from diarrhea, or 16 lakh in total? Similarly, in the richest country in the world, the country with a $25 trillion economy, there has never been a richer country in human history than the US is. And still, there are 34 million people, that's 3.4 crore people, who are living below the federal poverty line, but more starkly, 10 million people are food insecure. And more than 500,000 people, more than 5 lakh people in the richest country in the world are experiencing homelessness on any given night. And so it basically just starts telling you that if economic growth was enough, if being a rich country was enough, then why would you see the sort of numbers that we are seeing that? On top of that, economic growth creates its own new problems. And the one that I want to focus on is really an existential crisis coming almost hugely out of the rapid economic growth of the world, which is climate change. Economic growth leads to greater energy consumption. It boosts carbon emissions and pollution, depletes natural resources and goods, and it leads to climate change. So just by having more economic growth, are we going to solve the problem of climate change? And I think most of you, if not all of you, would agree that the answer is no. So, just want to emphasize again that the point is not that growth is unnecessary or not useful. I hope you have seen in the last slides, it is exactly the opposite. But the point is that growth is not the answer to all the challenges of poverty, and certainly not that of climate change. So this slide has a lot to absorb. And normally, when I give this lecture to somebody in a developed country, like in a much richer country, I would spend a lot more time on this. But growing up in a developing country, all of us are so aware of this, and which is that poverty is not just about having enough money to meet basic needs, but its impact is far greater. It is about staying hungry at night. It is about so many of our children being malnourished or stunted, with long-term impacts on cognition and learning. Poverty is about lack of shelter. It's about the homeless people we see on the streets. Poverty is being sick and not being able to see a doctor for preventive or curative care. Poverty is about not having access to school, and even if you access the school, not being able to read and learn. You all saw the ASA report that came out last month, one of the most eye-opening reports one can see on educational outcomes. Poverty is about not having a job and fearing continuously about future. It's about poverty is a lot about a higher chance of being put in jail. In the United States, you see it in terms of a disproportionate number of African Americans who are in jail. In a country like India, you see a disproportionate number of poor people who are in jail because they can't afford bail. And then, and the Supreme Court noted this very clearly. It's about how many people are stuck in jail, and they have been in jail awaiting a trial for a period longer than if they were found guilty and sentenced to jail. And And if you look at them, they are disproportionately the poor. And then, of course, poverty is being unable to adapt your work or home to climate change. So I hope, you are able to see that poverty is, when I use the word poverty for the next 30 odd minutes, it's not just about this person's income is low, but every single dimension that you see on the screen is included in the word poverty that we talk about, including climate change. All right, so where does measuring impact fall into this whole place? So we've been at it, right? We've been trying to get rid of poverty. The rich countries have been rich for a long time. As you see, America has been the richest country in the world for a very long time. And despite that, I showed you the statistics of how many people are going to sleep every night, either hungry or without a shelter on their heads. And so we've been at this problem of fighting poverty for a long time, and still it just doesn't seem to go away. What is the reason for that? Well, there are many, many reasons, but I would argue that one reason is our inability to break these cycles of poverty. And perhaps one reason for not being able to break the cycle of poverty is because we just don't know what works or not. So let me take you through one particular example of a vicious cycle of poverty. This picture comes from Udaipur, where one of the original studies that I'm going to talk to you about, both on immunization and also education, happened. So it's from a JPAL study. So if you're born in a poor household, you are less likely to send your children to school, so you have lower school enrollments. Even after you send the children to school, if you come from a poorer household, you're likely to have a higher probability these children will drop out. Even if these children don't drop out, or whichever children don't drop out, they attend the school much lesser, so they have a lower attendance rate. Even the children who attend, they have a lower achievements. That means they learn less, they graduate less, and then they end up with lower paying jobs. Once you are in lower paying jobs, you end up with lower savings, you are much more susceptible to health and other shocks, and therefore you end up again staying in a poor household, and this entire cycle begins from scratch. So this is one of the really pernicious cycles of poverty. So as a if you're the Education Secretary of India, or you're working with an education NGO like Pratham, you could focus on any of these. Each of these are really important ones. But let's say your aim is to increase attendance. You're the Education Secretary of India, and you send a note to everybody saying, you know what, I want all Indian government schools to have a much higher attendance. So the question then arises is, how do you achieve that? So hopefully, when you are in that sort of a position, the question you ask yourself is, what are the possible causes of low attendance, and what are the solutions to consider? This is where being a development economist becomes really, really fun. One of the best times that I had in the IS was trying to figure out exactly these sort of challenges. And same way when I went into economic consulting here in the US and now at MIT for the last few years, thinking through the theory of change as to, for instance, what is causing the attendance to be low. And as good economists, we always think about demand and supply. You would say, maybe there is low demand for schooling. And as the Education Secretary, you say, well, in that case, I'm going to run an information campaign. Maybe I'm going to improve the food served in free lunch programs. I used to work in the IS in Tamil Nadu, where a lot of our emphasis used to be to improve the midday meal scheme, which was pioneered by Tamil Nadu and now, of course, extends throughout the states. In a lot of countries around the world, people give conditional cash grants. If your child comes to the school 75% of the time in a month, then your parents receive a cash grant. This is highly prevalent. It's prevalent quite a bit in Latin American countries, for instance. Another thing you might say is that there must be barriers to students attending. So maybe it's the school uniform. The children are required to come to the school in uniforms. They don't have money for it. Let's get them a school uniform. Or maybe they are sick a lot of the time because of worms in the stomach. And this sounds like a trivial reason, but it was at the heart of a lot of the work that Nobel laureate Michael Kramer has done has been around figuring out how to get worms out of children's stomachs so that they can attend schools. On the supply side, you might say that the children are not attending school because they don't have enough school inputs. So for instance, the building could be really, really bad. You think about this building on the right, on your screen. What happens to this building in Rajasthan in the middle of the summer, right? Especially now that the summer is longer and hotter, when the temperature is 45 degrees. Do you really want to send your child to school in even after the school vacation has opened? What about books and blackboard? If there are not enough books and blackboard, how do you study? And then what about the supply and quality of teaching? A lot of education economists will tell you that, the teachers are not showing up for work. The teachers don't have the incentives to teach, to stay engaged with the class. Other people will say it's not about the teachers, it's about parents or community participation. Pratham will tell you that remedial education plays a hugely important part in improving learning outcomes. And so with this, the hope, if you're feeling overwhelmed at this stage with everything I have put on the screen, then that is exactly what I want you to feel. I want you to feel overwhelmed, because this is the challenge any of you who are doing economics will face, whether you join the IS or you join the World Bank or you join a non-profit. This is the challenge that you face. And the challenge is not that there are not enough good solutions, but the problem is that there are actually many, many seemingly good solutions. Now you're at the World Bank, you have a $10 million project, or you are the education secretary of Telangana or the education secretary of Madhya Pradesh, and you only have 10 crore rupees to spend. Should you spend that money on informational campaign? Should you spend that money to improve the lunch programs? Should you give some cash grants to parents? Should you spend the money on teacher training? Should you spend that money on blackboards or laptops like they tried to do it in UP? Should you give free uniforms? Money is finite. Government resources are finite. Which program do you choose? And I think one of the points that I'm trying to choose, hopefully you will see that through the next half an hour, is that a lot of time we end up making these choices based on instincts. Oh, I have a neighbor or I have a domestic help, and the domestic help is not sending her children to school. And the reason for that is because she is not aware of the importance of education. So let's run an educational campaign. Or many times we base it on ideology, which is, I can't tell you how many times I meet policymakers and we will talk about how cash incentives can really spur parents to send their children to school or to get their children vaccinated. And people will tell me, oh, you now want us to pay money to parents to do the right thing for their own children. So that's where our ideology comes in, right? We think, how could it be right to pay parents to do the right thing for their children, ignoring the massive positive externalities to society of immunization or education? Or it's a completely because of inertia. We have been doing something in a particular way, so we will continue doing it in a particular way. An example is Manrega, right? Like, I can't tell you how many programs in Manrega historically were all about literally digging water tanks, which would get washed away. Now, we understand, of course, that's the way that program works. But then a lot of district collectors started coming and saying, why do we only have to dig water tanks? Why can't we do something else? Can we use Manrega money to improve learning outcomes? Can we use Manrega money to help people start some businesses? And really has led to great outcomes. So I hope you will be able to see over the next few minutes how pairing a knowledge of local conditions with rigorous evidence from around the world to design your program can help you as an economist to find solutions to these programs or choose between these programs. But having chosen one program, so suppose you decided in this previous screen that you are going to give laptops to school children. Again, for some of you who might remember a few years ago, the Samajwadi Party came to power, and they, on this platform of giving one free laptop to every child in Uttar Pradesh schools, Clearly, that program has not worked. So the question was, would that program have worked differently if people had used data and impact evaluations to quickly understand, to test these different solutions and say, what is my theory of change? Is laptop really what the children need? What is the reason they don't come to school? And what is the impact of giving a laptop? Compare these different solutions, measure their impact, and then scale up only the one which is the most effective and the most cost-effective solution. And unfortunately, this is what is missing so many times in development economics. So I keep using the word impact. So that begs the question, what exactly is impact and how do you measure it? So impact, as an economist, we define impact as the comparison between what actually happened. So for instance, sticking to this example, what actually happened was that a laptop was given to school children in UP. So, to measure impact, you want to measure the impact of giving the laptop sometime after the program has been introduced, maybe 6 months after the laptop was given, 1 year after the laptop was given, 2 years after the laptop was given, versus what would have happened at the same point in time, 6 months or a year later, had the program not been introduced. Or in another world, and this is what we call the counterfactual, you compare Iqbal's learning outcomes if he got the laptop versus his learning outcome 6 months down the line if he had not gotten the laptop. And this alternative state is called the counterfactual. So once you know the counterfactual, then kind of it is easy to track the difference. So, the x-axis on this graph is time, the y-axis is the primary outcome. And you can see that over time, let's say the school attendance or learning outcome is gradually increasing. And at the red line, you give the laptop to children in UP, and then you observe what happens to the children who got the laptop. And you see that, oh, wow, the learning outcomes of these children who got the laptop increased a lot. Let us build the counterfactual. What would the learning outcome have been if the laptop had not been given? And you have this counterfactual, and you say, okay, voila, the difference between the learning outcomes between the blue line, which is the children without the laptop, and the yellow line, the children with the laptop. But remember, they are the same exact children. The difference between that is the impact. Okay, what happens if the counterfactual is on the flip side, which is the counterfactual goes up? Then the impact would have actually been negative. And this is actually a very, very important slide, because if I was there with you in person and I had done a survey with you and asked you this question, that if I showed you this graph about increase in the learning outcomes, and I have done this in universities, I have done it at the IS Academy in Missouri, I have done it in countries around the world, where I will show this graph and I will do a survey. I'll say, raise your hand if you think this program was successful. And the majority of people raise their hand and say, yes, this program was successful, because they're all assuming that the counterfactual is this. But what if the counterfactual was actually that actually, if you had not given the laptop to the children, the learning outcomes would have in fact been higher? And you can think about ex post many reasons why that could be, right? Maybe when you give the laptop to the child gets distracted. Instead of learning math and English, the child is now spending many months of their time or many weeks of their time learning how to program the laptop rather than learning how to do addition or subtraction. Maybe, the laptop has a very cool video game that the child gets distracted about and is now playing the video game, or, gets an internet connection and is on social media and on YouTube and on WhatsApp all the time. And so you can imagine a scenario of the world where actually the impact of giving the laptop is negative. So the child's learning outcome would have been much higher, the blue box, and ends up being the yellow box at the bottom. And therefore, you should not have actually given the laptop to the child. Or similarly, maybe if you gave the laptop and you saw that the learning outcomes actually fell, again, I would ask people to raise their hands and say, do you think this program failed? And the majority of people raise their hand and say, yes, this program absolutely failed. But what they're again in their mind, they're assuming that the counterfactual is this, that versus the counterfactual being the other way around. Okay, so now that you know how we in economics define impact, the challenge that happens is that the biggest challenge with this problem is, like, how do you measure the counterfactual? The counterfactual represents the state of the world where the program participants would not have experienced the program itself, right? So in a sense, it is the child who got the laptop, how they would have fared 6 months later if they hadn't gotten the laptop. So in a sense, the counterfactual never happened. The counterfactual cannot be observed. And therefore, you don't have this blue line. All you can see is this yellow line. This blue line is left to us as economists to construct, because absent this blue line, you don't really know if all the effort you're making in reducing poverty is working or not. Okay, so one of the things that we do at JPAL is we use randomized controlled trials, or RCTs, or randomized evaluations, to, in a sense, build this counterfactual. And how do we do that? We identify all eligible participants. So for instance, in this particular case, if the government of UP had come to JPAL, we would have said, you know what, let's identify who all are the people you want to give the laptop to. And they would have said, there are maybe 1 crore children we can give the laptop to. And we would have said, okay, do you have 1 crore laptops available? And the government would have said, no, are you kidding me? Like, we only have 1 lakh laptops right now. The supplier said it would take us another 6 months or 1 year to get the rest of the laptops. And even that is a very optimistic estimate. We'll say then, well, in that case, you only have 1 lakh laptops to give right now. You have 1 crore children who are eligible. How are you planning to select the 1 lakh children? And they would not say, they would make sure that our phones were closed. And then they would say, well, we were thinking to make sure to send the laptop to the chief minister's district and the education minister's constituency, and make sure we have some laptops in Lucknow and other places where the press is going to be observing the rollout of the laptop program. And what we would tell them is, you know what, instead of choosing which of these 1 crore children get the laptop, who are the 1 lakh out of the 1 crore children who get laptop, can we randomly allocate these 1 lakh laptops? Because you anyway don't have 99 lakh remaining laptops. 99 lakh children are not going to get the laptop for the next 1 year. So rather than you picking the winners and the losers, let's randomly pick half the children who are going to get the laptops, and half the children, and like whatever 99 lakh children who are not going to get the laptop. And so all of a sudden you have you throw the toss a coin, or you run a lottery, and you get a treatment group, the 1 lakh children who get the laptops, which are immediately available, and the 99 lakh children who have to wait for these new laptops to arrive. And now you measure the impact after 6 months, after 1 year, as long as the rest of the laptops don't arrive, between the program, which is the laptop group, versus the comparison group, where business runs as usual in schools. And then you measure the difference in the impact of the program. And what you do is, because of random assignments, members of the treatment and comparison groups don't differ systematically at the outset of the evaluation. So any differences that subsequently arise between them can be attributed to the program rather than to other factors like the minister's district, or the quality of the school building, or the quality of the district collector, or the fact that one school had a better trained teacher. All of those factors, if you did your randomization well, then they kind of wash between the treatment and the comparison group, and the only systematic difference between those two groups is the availability of the laptop or not. So this, in a sense, is at the heart of how economists use random assignment. Many of you would have taken classes in statistics, so I'm preaching to the choir here, but this is how economists are able to measure impact in a very rigorous fashion. Okay, so I know many of you probably have questions at this stage, so please keep noting the questions. I promise you I will answer as many of your questions as I can. But I think it'll be easy for you to probably see this through an actual case study, and it is something probably a lot of you have experienced but certainly know about, which is that which is of the fact that there is a really big problem of immunization in India, but also around the world, which is making sure that we get a greater coverage of immunization across our especially in the rural parts of the country. Okay, so what is the reason for this problem? So again, as economists, think about it as a supply and a demand problem. The first problem is that we have a very unreliable supply of healthcare. There have been many surveys in India. Taking you through the years. Back in 2006, there was a survey which found that 40% of the primary health centers are closed. When you go and visit them. In 2003, Abhijit and Esther did one in Udaipur, where they found that 45% of the PHCs in Udaipur were closed. Rima Hana, who's at Harvard, and I did a study in Karnataka back in 2017, where we randomly visited these primary health centers, and our surveyors went and found 40% of the primary health centers were shut and closed on the days and during the hours that they were supposed to be actually open. So we clearly have a problem of supply. But then we also have a problem of demand, which is that a lot of people don't have, a lot of parents don't demand enough immunization for their children. And you would ask what, for instance, many times I would go and meet national health mission directors, and they would say, yeah, we have really low immunization in district X or block Y, because वहां पे तो parents आते ही नहीं है बच्चों को टीका लगवाने के लिए. And then you ask them, अच्छा वो क्यों नहीं आते टीका लगवाने के लिए, क्या वजह है कि टीकाकरण आपका इतना कम होता है? What is the reason why the immunization campaigns are so low? And they will give reasons like, oh, because it's a tribal area, the primary health center is too far away. Others would talk about, oh, like these children are being taken to the fields, or the parents have to come take a day off from Manrega work, so they will lose their 150, 200 rupees. Others will say, oh, it's very painful for the child, and sometimes maybe it can make the child sick for a couple of days, and parents don't want to do that, especially because, and lots of other people, health department people will say, parents just don't see the benefit of immunization because they can't see, every time you get sick, you can see that, but you cannot measure the number of times your child did not get sick because of immunization. So it leads to a lack of demand. So what is the kind of solution? So the solution that we tested was to ensure reliable supply. Since we can't control the government system, instead what we said is, can we create mobile vaccination clinics? So Seva Mandir, which was an NGO working in Rajasthan, created these mobile vaccination clinics. You see a photo of one of those clinics where two health workers with the vaccines in that ice box are going in a motorcycle to reach the tribal areas of Udaipur. And we are going to monitor these immunization camps through, pretty much asking these people to take a selfie. And obviously you can geolocate the selfie, you can measure the time at which the selfie was taken to make sure that these health workers are actually going to the place where they were supposed to go and at the time they were supposed to be there. And on the demand side, we said, can we increase the demand by giving parents a small incentive, just 1 kilo of lentils, which is, so can having 1 kilo of dal being given every time you get your child immunized lead to parents increasing their demand for immunization? And once you finish the whole five cycle immunization round, then you would get a thali or a plate. In this particular case, you can see this parent is getting 1 kilogram of dal for getting her child immunized. Okay, so this is how the immunization worked. We do a baseline study. Only 3% of the children in the baseline were found to be fully immunized. So almost 100% of children get their first and their second and their third shot, which typically happens at the, I think the first two shots happen at the primary health center itself, at the at the hospital itself at the time of birth. The second shot happens a month later or so on. A majority of parents were getting their first few shots for the children, but only 3% of the children had their full round of 5 or 6 shots, which are required to be defined as full immunization. So on the right side on the screen in the graph, you can see these blue dots and these white dots and the red dots. So the white dots were basically the control group. These are the randomly selected hamlets where these immunization camps were not held. And then we had 30 hamlets which only had the camps. So those are your red hamlets. So the red dots are the randomly chosen hamlets where we sent the people on the motorcycle, but we did not give them the incentives. And the blue hamlets are the one where, in addition to sending them the motorcycle, we also gave them the kilogram of dal as well as the thali plate at the end of it. So this was a study done with Abhijit Banerjee and Esther Duflo, along with Rachel Glenister at that time at JPAL, and they did this study. And what do they find? So after they tracked 1-year-olds after 20 months, so in the control hamlets, they found that the full immunization rate, which is the 5 or 6 shots, was 5%. So 5% of the children had gotten full immunization rates. And then what happens when you send, again, if you were here, I would have asked you for guesses about what is the order of magnitude here. And I can assure you, almost all of you would have undershot here, or overshot on one and undershot on the other. But having regular camps in the school, in the village, increases immunization rate by an order of 3 times. So you go from 5% to 17%, so a 3x increase in immunization rate, which is a staggeringly huge number for those of you who work in healthcare. Getting immunization rates up from 5 to 17% is massive. Think about it, right? And then what happens if you just give these parents 1 kilogram of lentils? Well, the numbers become even more striking. So now you're looking at a 7x increase in immunization rate. And so you think about it, right? This study was done somewhere around 2010. We got independence in 1947, rounded off to 1950. So 60 years of independence and so much effort by the government, and we are stuck at 5%. And one simple program run for just 20 months gets you a 7 times increase in immunization rates in just a matter of a few months. Like, this is the power of development economics. This is the power of microeconomics. This is where I said growth is not enough, but certain other things can play a huge part. So for those of you who are keen to connect this to what you learn in class in economics, I hope you saw, in that the program design entailed issues around supply and demand. There are issues for those of you who follow behavior economics about present bias, where we, overweight things like my child is sick or my child is crying versus the long-term benefits of this. People procrastinate. How incentives can work to get us over these procrastinations, how small nudges, which is in this case, the visibility of walking back with a thali in your hand, how that can be a huge nudge to get the parents, whether it is through reminders or externalities. And what are the externalities of getting these immunizations? So I hope, for those of you who are in your second or third year, you were able to see a lot of these concepts in economics in the program design. I just wanted, this is prior to COVID, when I had to convince people that vaccination is not just a problem of developing countries, but is also a problem in rich countries. This is from 2019, so 1 year before COVID, where you were having measles outbreaks in a country like America with such advanced healthcare system, simply because people did not see the value of of vaccination. And so it's not just a problem of developing or poorer countries, but also a rich country problem. But of course, COVID showed us that we all know this. Okay, so some of you might be saying that this is very archaic. There's a big problem in economics about generalizability, which is taking lessons from one context to the other. So that was Rajasthan. A few years later, Esther and a few co-authors took this program to Haryana, with used tablets to, you can see this lady health worker using the Aadhaar card and scanning the Aadhaar card, putting the data directly into tablets to track immunization, and then use that information to give incentives, but the incentive is now mobile recharging. So as soon as you get your child immunized, you get mobile charging, and the mobile charging can be of these different dimensions. You could get 90 rupees every time you get an immunization shot. That's your option A. In option B, you get 50 rupees of mobile charge instantaneously for each of those shots. But then, since as I just told you, it's the fourth and the fifth, third and the fourth, as the fourth and the fifth shot, which is the hardest to get parents to bring back their child for. So therefore, you have a higher amount of 100 and 200 rupees in option B, which is the third column. Then you go to option C, which is the fourth column, which is saying what is the difference between a large incentive of 90 rupees versus a 50 rupees incentive? Is it the amount of incentive which is important, or is it just the act of giving the incentive which is very important? These are fundamentally big questions in economics. And then the final one, which is doing the same thing, which is increasing levels of incentives for the fourth and fifth shot, but the level itself is very low. So just 10 rupees of phone recharge versus a 90 rupees of phone recharge is what you see in option D. And once again, I would have done a survey at this point and asked you which of these programs do you think works more, and the vast majority of people typically would have said, a higher amount works better, much better than a smaller amount. And then I would have shown you the data that actually, the smaller one, the column D leads to pretty large, significant impacts. So this is an actual program that we did in Haryana with these folks from the IAS, Mr. Arora who was ACS Health, which is Additional Chief Secretary Health, and Ms. Amneet Kumar, who was the MD of NHM, along with Esther and a bunch of PIs, designed this program in Haryana to taking the lessons from Rajasthan, did it in these districts which have low immunization rates. And the key study was that if you identify local immunization ambassadors, combine it with these incentives, option D works out the most. And now this program is in the stages of a phase scale up with the government, and also working on their Anmol health outcome. So again, like just taking you back to this slide once, to show you that as a policymaker, whether you're in the government or a nonprofit, these are really fundamental questions. Should I give a 90 rupee incentive? Should I give a 50 rupee incentive? Should it increase over time? And economic growth is not going to give you answers to these questions, but the sort of work that we do in the field, these randomized control trials, can give really rigorous empirical evidence on what to do. This is just one pathway to scale. I'm actually going to skip this slide. For those of you are interested to see how this micro evidence that we generate as economists turns into large-scale impact in the field, I encourage you to go to our website and look at this section called Evidence to Policy, and you will see these examples. Each of these underlined themes is an example. There are themes from India, themes from the United States, on how these small little programs that I, for instance, showed you, they have been scaled up to massively impact the lives of people. But some of you may not be interested. Some of you, again, I'm going to skip over this. A lot of these examples are just to give you the sense of the reach of this. In Karnataka, I worked with the health department. This is my own project on seeing whether whether having these biometric attendance of doctors and nurses in health clinics can lead to attendance increases or not. Before this program was massively rolled out, it was going to be a World Bank program. We in fact find that it has zero impact. In fact, we find installing these biometric attendance devices in health clinics had a negative impact, which means the attendance actually fell afterwards in these primary health centers compared to the control group. So the government actually decided not to scale up this program in the primary health centers. We worked with the government of Gujarat many years ago. At that time, Mr. Hardik Shah was the member secretary of the Gujarat Pollution Control Board. Now he's the private secretary to the Prime Minister of India. So with Hardik, we worked on this project to reduce the effluent discharge and improve the quality of air and water in Surat. Surat is one of the most industrialized districts of Gujarat, and we worked with them to figure out if, how do you improve the design of audits, the audits that these government agencies do. All of us are aware of this. Government official comes for what they call, quote unquote, an inspection on the premises. But these inspections either are often lead to corruption or they are inefficient. And we found out ways on how these things can really lead to an actual decrease in effluent discharge. With the government of Punjab, we are working on this really massive project on how do you reduce stubble burning in Punjab. All of you in Delhi are aware of stubble burning and the pollution it brings. How do you reduce stubble burning? How do you reduce the extraction of groundwater through tube wells because of free electricity? And really, how can that be changed? In government of Odisha, increasing learning outcomes through remedial education. And for instance, in the government of Delhi, we are working on how do you use AI and machine learning to reduce the incidence of GST theft. We all know these incidents of going to restaurants where we are charged GST, but we are all 100% certain that the GST is not being given to the government, but the restaurant owner is kind of pocketing the GST. How can economists help and AI tools help identify the GST, where the GST is being stolen and reduce that? So again, we don't have enough time to go over this, but we've been working a lot with state governments. You can see if you go clockwise from below, that is Tamil Nadu, the next one is Punjab, the next one is Odisha, and the one on top is Haryana. We are working a lot with state governments on the field to try and improve the delivery of programs and applying the tools of economics in real time. And this is at the heart of what the JPAL journey has been. We do randomized evaluations in the field, but we also do a lot of capacity building of folks like you and others to increase the number of people who understand how to rigorously measure impact. JPAL was started 20 years ago. In fact, it's our 20-year anniversary. Every dot that you see on this graph is an RCT, which we have done around the world. At this point, there are more than 1,600 RCTs. Our professors come from universities around the world. Some of you will recognize, for instance, the logo of the IIMs in India, but also from around the world. And they work on sectors across all types of sectors. So at the bottom, you will see sectors like agriculture and education, which you think of as poverty sectors, but also on issues of political economy and governance. How do you strengthen democracy and reduce misinformation, social protection? And each one of our JPAL centers is based at a local university. So for instance, our head office where I'm based is based at MIT's economics department. Our India office is based at CRIA/IFMR, which is a university in Chennai. Our Europe office is based at Paris School of Economics. So we keep a foot strongly in academia and a second foot in policy and research. Our affiliated professors have won all sorts of recognition for exactly the type of work that I gave you. So for instance, Abhijit Banerjee, Esther Duflo, and Michael Kremer, two of them are co-founders. All three of them are founding affiliates. They won the 2019 Nobel Prize. The study that I talked to you about, the immunization study, was one of the studies mentioned by the Nobel Committee in that award. Many of our affiliates, including Raj Chetty, who's at Harvard, and Amy Finkelstein, have won the Clark Medal, which is considered, which is given to the top economist under the age 40, and is seen as the road to the Nobel Prizes. Lots of them have won the MacArthur Genius Award, and actually, I believe 5 out of the 7 Infosys prizes have also gone to JPAL professors, including this year's Infosys prize going to Rohini Pandey at Yale, and previously to Senthil Mulanathan, Abhijit, Raj, and Esther. Okay, so, lots of people ask me, what's the future? The future is a lot of research on climate change, but it is also research on misinformation. How do you prevent people from being misled by information on WhatsApp? It's a lot about using big data for finding solutions to the world. It's about finding ways to reduce discrimination. It is about finding ways to understand what is the best way for the future of work. For those of you who are interested, you can go to our website. There are a lot of these RCTs. As you will see from this graph, more than 600 million people have been reached by the programs that JPAL has found to be effective. I have an article. You can Google "growth is not enough." That's and it's an article with Sam. For those of whom of you are looking for a book to read, Abhijit and Esther's book, The Poor Economics, is a fantastic resource. Esther's speech on The Economist as a Plumber, the video is available online. You can listen to that. And for others who are interested in taking this a step further, at MIT, we have created a whole online course. There are 6 online courses which you can take online free of cost. If you pass all 5 of them, you can come to MIT for a 6-month accelerated master's program. This year, we have 3 people from India out of a cohort of 20 who have come. Last year, we had 1 person from Singapore who came after their 12th class. And they went with a master's in economics from MIT in 6 months to join their BA in economics in Singapore. So they came even before they had joined their undergrad program. So what I'm trying to say is there is no requirement that you need to have a BA in economics before you even join this course. You can, if you clear these 5 online courses and do it well, you can be admitted to MIT and get a full master's in economics in only 6 months on the campus. So I hope you'll do this. You can Google DETP and figure that. So I had a very cool slide at the end, which I'm going to skip. For the interest of time, I'm already at the 9 o'clock mark. So I'm going to just end my presentation here and say, I hope, in the last few minutes, I have been able to convince those of you, most of you, about how, as microeconomists and as development economists, you can be working in the field, whether it's in the IIS or at the World Bank or in a nonprofit or in many other ways to kind of really impact and make a meaningful impact in the lives of the poor and to reduce climate change in very, very effective ways. So let me stop here. I'm happy to take any questions you might have. Thanks.
Thank you so much, sir, for your insightful words. Now the floor is open for questions. You can send in your questions to the questions moderator, and I request Anna to take it from here.
Good morning, sir. The first question is being asked by one of the participants, and it is as follows. It seems like RCT is a perfect solution to many types of policy uncertainty. Can you tell us about some of the drawbacks of RCT? What are the criticisms and how is JPAL working around them?
Great. Yeah, thanks for asking that excellent question. Yeah, so the first thing to know is that a randomized evaluation, there are times when it is the right solution and there are times when it is absolutely the wrong solutions. So a lot of people get surprised by that because they think, oh, JPAL is out there to do more randomized evaluations in the world. And I'm actually telling you as a fact, the vast majority of times when we get a phone call to say, oh, I read about JPAL and I read about the Nobel Prize. Can you come and do an RCT in my district or in my field or off my program? In the vast majority of our cases, after having a conversation with them, the answer that JPAL gives is no. A randomized evaluation is not the right solution for your problem. You don't want to do an RCT. And so what are the times when this thing happens? The first thing is, if you have already rolled out a program, a massive program in the country, and then you come and tell us, oh, can you do an RCT of my program to show me whether the program is working or not? Well, it is too late. It's very hard for us to do an RCT of a Manrega program or the free cylinder or the free LPG program to understand what the impact is. You want to be there before the program is rolled out. Like I gave you the example of the laptop program, to compare one alternative against multiple alternatives before you scale it up. So that's one area where we say no, and it's also one of the limitations of an RCT. I cannot come and tell you today whether the Manrega program has been successful or not. There are other methodologies that you can use to try and figure that out. Maybe there was a natural experiment, and then you can use a regression discontinuity, or you can do some really matching of participants in a particular, with beneficiaries, with non-beneficiaries, but RCT is not the right solution. Another time I tell folks that you should not be doing an RCT is if you have already made up your mind that you're going to only do X and you're not willing to compare X with other alternatives. So for instance, there was a NGO which was called Building Toilets for Girls for Education. Like they had a name which and this was in their mission statement. And I remember talking to the CEO of that NGO and asking, why do you build toilets? And she had like, okay, if you don't have toilets for girls in schools, then they will not come to the school and they will not learn, and therefore they will drop out, and also for the dignity of the girls. And I completely get the part about the dignity of the girl, but I said there is lots of evidence which shows that actually building toilets does not work to increase learning outcomes. So if your goal is to have safety and security and dignity of the girl, this is a very good thing to go forward with. But what if the evidence and the RCT finds that there is no improvement in learning outcomes? Are you going to stop your NGO from building girls' toilets? And she said, no, because we still believe in the dignity aspect of building girls' toilets. And I said, fantastic, then why do you want to waste time and money on an RCT? You are doing a very noble thing. Keep doing the noble thing. You don't want to build an RCT. Similarly, there are issues around generalizability. The people will say, okay, you did this program in Mali or in the Dominican Republic. How do you know it is going to work in Ethiopia or in Egypt? In fact, people will say, you did this program in Rajasthan. How do you know it will work in Haryana? It's two different states. So that's why you saw what a lot of my slides were about understanding the local context, doing small pilots before you roll it out to the bigger area. So there are, like with everything else, there are limitations, there are pros and cons, and you have to go into that. RCT is not a blunt tool. It has to be used very selectively, where useful, where appropriate. And I hope, that's why I took you on a journey around the world, around India, to show you, where it is possible on different things in education and in health and in GST and VAT collection. But for every one of their slides, there is probably 10 other examples I can give you where we actually said no to an RCT. Great.
Thank you, sir. The next question is also from a participant, and it is, there was a recent report that the wealth inequality in India has rapidly increased. Do you think that Indian polity is taking the right course of action in this regard? How do you think we can find a better balance between equity and efficiency in policy making?
Yeah, excellent. So I think we all know that economic growth can lift a lot of people out of poverty, but kind of the evidence is mixed in terms of what does it do to inequality? Does it raise inequality? For how many people does it raise inequality? What we know for sure is that a lot of people are going to miss the growth train, and trickle down works only to some extent. You still have to tackle a lot of other problems. So yes, inequality is a problem. It's a problem which is getting exacerbated by climate change. COVID exacerbated inequalities around the world. If you again look at the ASA report, the children who were able to get tuitions at home, the parents were able to afford tuitions. The ones who had a cell phone in their house or multiple cell phones in the house with an internet connection, those children were able to do so much better. You look at the private schooling, they were able to adapt to COVID much better. So, anytime there is a shock, whether it is a health shock, a climate shock, a shock like the earthquakes, the poor just keep falling behind, and and the same happened in India a lot because of COVID. And I do think that you need many programs. The social protection net has to be strengthened. I think India is actually in a far better position to strengthen its social protection net than many other developing countries are, because of the jam, the trinity that the government has of an Aadhaar card, a financial inclusion, and a digital identity that the government has really emphasized. The ability of the Indian government to actually identify the poor and give them the social protection things, whether it is LPG cylinders or houses and other things, is hugely important. So I just hope that that carries on.
Thank you, sir. The next question is also from a participant, and it is: working in the Indian administrative services and institutions like JPAL, you have extensive experience in interacting with people at the grassroots level to try and understand their side of the story in the bigger picture of development of a country. Sir, how do you think the insights you have gained from this have helped you when making policies? Also, can you please share one such memorable experience in this regard?
Great, excellent question. It's also a very fun question. Yes, so I think the biggest thing I have learned, and it is humility, is basically that we know so little about why things happen in a particular way. And without data and evidence and going into the field, asking people the questions through qualitative survey, gathering quantitative data, we are really shooting in the dark. And so, if there is one lesson of all these years, first in the IS and then at MIT now for the last 14, it's basically that it's very important to have a theory of change. It's very important to have your ideas, your hypothesis, but don't jump the gun and assume that they are correct. Go test them in the field, ask people the right question. So to your question about a memorable example, this happened a few years ago. We were working to build a partnership with the government of Tamil Nadu, and the government one of the problems there is of low levels of breastfeeding. And I think all of you are aware, in India, Cerelac, Similac, all of these baby powders, parents often think that it's the right, the baby powder giving Cerelac is better than feeding breast milk. And so the government had this whole information campaign, which it was going to launch, focused at the mother. How do you convince the mothers to not give Cerelac or Similac, but to breastfeed? And so they wanted us to come in and evaluate that. It was still at the pilot stage. And so it was like, let's evaluate how useful this information campaign will be in convincing them to do something. And we said, can we, before we go further, can we do a field survey of some of the districts in Tamil Nadu to understand what are the main reasons people are giving these baby powders? Who are the decision makers in the family, and so forth. And we did this survey, and we found overwhelming respondents said that the decision to give the baby powder is not made by the mother, not made by the father. And of course, once I tell you the answer, you will all say, of course, we understood. This is so obvious. But the decision is made by the mother-in-law. And it's one of those things where our instinct was, let's spend crores of rupees on this information campaign targeted at the mother. The message would have been completely different. when actually the mother has very little agency in this decision. So I think that's that was a fun example of how when we brought these results to the government immediately paused the rollout of the information campaign. They said this is going to be a waste of money and effort. We're not going to do this information campaign. Let's rethink about what's the best message to give to the mother-in-law instead of giving it to the mother. Anna, back to you.
Thank you so much, sir. Due to time constraints, we will not be able to take any more questions. But thank you so much, sir, for taking the questions.
Thank
Great.
you so much.
Thank you very much for coming. I know it's late in the evening. Nobody wants to spend their Saturday night, especially not listening about randomized evaluation. So thank you to all the brave souls who showed up, and thank you for inviting me.
Now I call upon Shiona to propose the vote of thanks.
Good morning to our respected speaker, Mr. Iqbal Dhaliwal, senior members and junior members of our college community. I'd like to take this opportunity to express my gratitude to Mr. Iqbal Dhaliwal, our distinguished speaker, for taking time out of his busy schedule to share his insightful knowledge with us on the subject, Why Growth is Not Enough. Thank you, sir. I extend my sincere gratitude to our college administration for their constant guidance and support in all our efforts. I also thank the audience for being such active partners. Once again, thank you all.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
So can we, sorry,
Yeah.
sir, but can we click a photo right now?
Yes, yes.
I request all the participants to please switch on their cameras so that we can click a photo. On the count of 3, 1, 3, 2, 1. Thank you, sir.
All right, good to see some more faces. All right, guys, thank you for doing this and staying up late. Bye-bye. Good night.
Thank you, sir. Bye.
Good.
Good day.
Thank you so much, sir.